All right, guys, welcome back to the Pocket Mads channel. It's Maddie here, and guess what? We're doing a tier list. That's right, our first new tier list of this new metagame. We're going to be ranking all of the most relevant decks in the current metagame. This is after PMPT number 29 this past weekend. A lot of really good information and data. I think with that, at this point, we're pretty much into this new season. Things are pretty crazy. Lots of new deck lists. In fact, half of the decks that are seeing played this season didn't really see much play in previous seasons. So it's a very interesting time. I'm going to be giving you my opinions about each of these deck lists, and I'm going to be ranking them based around, not just like their inherent strength, but their overall meta viability. So which decks I would choose to play, in ranked or tournaments, right? Of course, there's no ranked right now, but in terms of competitive play, this is where I would kind of place them currently. Now, the last couple of tier lists we've done them differently for the sake of me not taking all day to edit these videos. So what we're going to do is flip back and forth between this tier list and then, of course, Limitless, where we can take a look at all of the different decks, their win rates, their matchups, and then pull up an actual example of the deck list. It's just easier to do it that way than for me to edit everything in post. So that's how we're going to do it. Before we get into it, don't forget to register for PMPT number 30. That's right, the 30th tournament. It's crazy, we've done 30 of these, but PMPT number 30, Amazing Aura, is open for registration. Link down in the description below. If you guys would like to register, I would heavily recommend it and also would appreciate it. So yeah, there we go. All right. On to the tier list. I love doing the tier lists because there's so many funny comments of people that disagree, and it's always fun. It's always fun to do. But anyway, the first deck on the tier list today, in no particular order, I suppose, maybe alphabetical, is going to be Blaziken. Now, there is sort of one clear way that people are playing Blaziken this season, and that is primarily with the new Fire-type cast form, the Sunny Day cast form, which is a really strong card. I'll pull up a deck list, for example. Blaziken right now currently is the second most played deck so far this season, but the win rate leaves a little bit to be desired with a 47.9% win rate, almost 10% of the meta share. Now, the meta progressed very rapidly. I'm just going to pull up the number one example. The meta progressed pretty rapidly. Ooh, I just hit my mic. For Blaziken because it kind of popped up as sort of a counter meta option to Sceptile, which, was really popular early on in the season, and actually is quite good into Sceptile, mostly because cast form can 1-hit KO things like Kartana and Pheromosa, and then kind of put your opponent in a really, not great position, you know what I mean? So Blaziken doing really well in that matchup specifically. However, this is a deck list that just hasn't been performing well into most other things in the metagame, and I think that its win rate sort of reflects that, quite frankly. I think that Blaziken isn't a terrible deck. It's just into a lot of the different things in the metagame it doesn't do very well, and I think one of the core issues with that is Blaziken's breakpoints are just a little bit awkward. It does 120 damage, which coincidentally with burn is 140. We are playing a Rocky Helmet in the deck to fix a little bit of that math, but a lot of Ogerpon going around, a lot of PCL going around. Most Pokemon that see meta relevant play right now are not getting 1-hit KO'd by Blaziken, and that makes things a little bit difficult because, quite frankly, other decks just have more going for them, whether it's Lucario or Altaria or even Sceptile into most matchups. Hydreigon is another example. They just kind of do more throughout the game, and Blaziken, of course, being a very linear deck list, it does struggle a little bit. It might end up that Heatmore and Cyrus just might be a better combo for Blaziken as the season goes on, but again, as we take a look at this here, Blaziken right now operating at the second most played deck, 47.9% win rate. This will likely continue to go down, although it is interesting because Sceptile did get first place this past weekend, which means that more people will probably want to play Sceptile, and then vice versa also want to play Blaziken. So I don't think it's the worst deck in the metagame, but I think pretty solidly it's going to just belong right here in the B tier. Again, I do think it'll have a relevant matchup into a relevant deck, being Sceptile after I got first place, but into most other things, I don't feel very confidently about Blaziken. So B tier is where it goes. Now, hopefully we make this video somewhat quick, by the way, because there's a lot of decks here, and I don't want this to be like a 2-hour-long video. Next up is going to be Alolan Ninetales, the updated version with Crawdon, and people now play with the new supporter card. Now, the Ninetales deck here is the 17th most played deck this season, so it's really not that popular, and has a 178 to 198 win rate. That's a 46% win rate. So here's a deck list that, again, is very fun, very niche. Parasol Lady is that new supporter card. Allows you to scoop up the Crawdons and then reuse them to have the Unruly Claw ability used more than once. I think Parasolitti is a really cool card, and I think that Ninetales is a cool deck list. It's a very it's a very specific deck. There's really nothing else in the game that operates under energy discarding and energy locking. It's just sort of something that's unique to Ninetales. I've always liked Alolan Ninetales, but I just think it's not strong enough. If this was a Pokemon that was, let's say, a Mega Pokemon or a basic Pokemon, if some of the peripherals in this deck list were just a little bit better, I think Ninetales would actually be a pretty decent strategy. I think it has kind of everything going for it. But unfortunately, Ninetales itself isn't that strong of a card. It doesn't have too much HP, and it doesn't deal a lot of damage. So there's just a couple of things that are really in the way of Ninetales that I just don't think it's a good enough deck list. That's just the reality. I do think it's really fun. Now, again, honestly, I feel quite similarly to Ninetales that I do to Blaziken. I think that this is, again, a pretty solid deck. Like, it is in the metagame. It's a respectable deck list, but we really can't mention this deck amongst any of the other higher contending decks currently in the metagame. So I think Ninetales also B tier is probably a somewhat accurate placement for this deck. Again, I don't feel too strongly either way here. These are decks that could find a nice positioning in the metagame from week to week if they have good matchup spreads into relevant decks, but you know, carrying themselves through the greater metagame is going to be difficult because they just sort of lack in certain capacities. Next up is going to be Mega Altaria. That we have varying different Mega Altarias in this tier list. I think we have 3 different versions. The first one is going to be Sleep Altaria, which, you know, interestingly enough, has kind of dropped all the way down to the 12th most played deck this season. Most people in favor playing Mega Lucario in Igglybuff, which is interesting because I think 90% of these decks really do operate in the same vein. It's just they have like basically the same tier of consistency, and they kind of either flip heads on sleep, or your opponent doesn't play sleep counter and you probably have a pretty good chance of winning, or they do and you don't have a good chance of winning. So it's just sort of an interesting thing. Lucario seemingly is a more worthwhile choice than Altaria, but Sleep Altaria still seeing a bit of play. By the way, 12th most played deck. It has a 53.24% win rate. 403 to 335. So honestly, I think the sleep decks, at least so far this season, have operated at a very high level, and they are very, very strong deck lists, decks that you really do have to counterplay for, or else they kind of will just sort of run away with games in the metagame if they see enough play. Nothing too different, at least with this deck list. It's pretty much the exact same deck as we saw in previous seasons, that being last season. And I think it's really good. I do. I mean, I think I think all of the sleep decks, quite frankly, like have very top tier meta potential. I don't think anybody would really argue that these like Bad Dreams Darkrai decks aren't good. I think they are some of the strongest decks in the game. What's interestingly, the thing that's strange here is that this deck list, although you know, most people think about it quite commonly, at least so far this season, has been just replaced by the Lucario version, which to me does kind of skew my interpretation of where I would kind of rank this deck list. Typically what we do in the tier lists is if we have decks that are very similar to other decks that see more play or have more success, then it kind of knocks them down a peg just because there's just other options that are more similar. So what we're going to do here is put this at the very top of A tier. Very good win rate, not seeing a ton of play, and again, I think most people choosing to play Lucario over Altaria, but coincidentally, still a top tier deck, so we're going to put it right there in the A tier. It'll likely continue to be high A tier. Might be kind of spoilers about where we'll put the Sleep Lucario deck, but Altaria A tier nonetheless. Next up is Giratina Darkrai. Let's take a look here. Giratina Darkrai finding itself at the 20th most played deck this season, 152 to 126, actually quite a respectable win rate. An abnormally a large amount of ties here, which could be into Oricorio, into some tournaments here, of course, because of the match timers, but a 51.5% win rate. Let's pull up an example here. Magma the Vice. Let's take a look at his deck list. I don't think this is a deck that's changed a whole lot. We are playing one Field Blower, so it does look like, you know, Giratina Darkrai has maybe a new, you know, trainer card that we can throw into these deck lists and get some value added. Still playing Starting Plains, Peculiar Plaza, a Lucky Ice Pop, Rocky Helmet, Giant Cape, the one Indeedee. So this is sort of the core package of Giratina Darkrai that we've seen for quite some time. I think there's still a lot of merit to this deck list. I think since we've gotten sort of the Lucky Ice Pop Indeedee stuff with I think it was Starting Plains, in fact. Ever since we got Starting Plains and Indeedee, I think that Giratina Darkrai has been a very solid deck. Hasn't really entered back into the metagame as something to be very well respected or feared, I guess is the word. But definitely a deck list that can win games. And I think that the data that we have here really does sort of tell me everything I need to know about Giratina Darkrai. 20th most played deck. I don't think it'll really surge up so much this season. Maybe if it wins a big tournament, might become a little bit more popular. Just over 1% of the meta share here, but a pretty solid win rate, 152 to 126, meaning, again, if you discount the ties, this deck actually has a very phenomenal win rate. This is going to be an interesting case here, but I think considering the fact that it is a deck that has been performing at a high level so far this season, and I don't really know, well, I guess what we can do really quickly is take a look at its matchups. I know we don't have a lot of data, but I am curious just to see. Good into Sleep Lucario, really good into Gourgiest Altaria, decent into Magnezone, struggles into Hydreigon pretty prominently, and that's kind of the only thing. I've got also Sceptile. So that's okay. All right. That tells me everything I need to know. That Giratina Darkrai struggling into Sceptile and Hydreigon really does knock it down a peg. I guess it's sort of a pub stomper deck. It's sort of beating a lot of the non-super significant decks of the metagame, which is crazy. Let's put this also B tier, but I'm going to put it higher than Blaziken and Ninetales. I'm going to put this like top B tier. I don't think it's that those matchups that I just saw there into Hydreigon and Sceptile completely took it out of A tier for me because those are very significant matchups in the metagame, at least currently. So we'll put this B tier, and I think that's probably fine. I don't know if anybody's really going to be too upset about that. Anyway. Next up is Lucario. So again, we have two different versions of Lucario. I know Limitless is going to have a million different Lucario categorizations. I figure anything that's not Sleep Lucario or Greninja Lucario. In fact, do we have Greninja Lucario on here? We do. Okay, so 3 different Lucario decks. So we're going to break them into 3 categories. Whether you're playing Darkrai Lucario with Bad Dreams, or you're playing Greninja Lucario, or you're just playing just the kind of a fighting package Lucario, which is what this one is what I'm going to categorize it as. The 5th most played deck this season, just under 5% meta share. This season is very spaced out, by the way. This might be the most diverse, healthy metagame that we've had so far in Pokemon Pocket, so shout out. The 5th most played deck, it has a 48.8% win rate, pretty 50-50, with, of course, if you don't account the ties. So this is one of those decks that I think is totally fine, but unfortunately, Lucario does seemingly have other variants that are just sort of better than playing like, you know, your standard package of fighting type Pokemon. Hitmonchan is categorized differently, but that deck really struggles into most of the metagame. So we're going to call this like Hitmontop, Hitmonlee, Hitmonchan, non-EX Hitmonchan, and then things like Rampardos, Fighting Coach Lucario, just sort of fighting toolbox Lucario. I'm going to package it all into one deck list. In fact, I'll pull up an example that probably would help. So the number one example here, we'll do like this one, and this is kind of what we're looking at. So this is a Rampardos version, I suppose, with one Mega Lucario and then one Fighting Coach Lucario, and then just sort of whatever subsequent fighting Pokemon I suppose you would want in the deck list. Yeah, and I think it's pretty good. I do think Lucario is just a strong Pokemon. It's flexible in the sense that you'd rather just play it with like a package that is already sort of defined. And I think that's one of the more awkward parts about the fighting archetypes right now is that, you know, we got all of this new support with Karina and Arena of Antiquity, but we didn't really get like a core fighting Pokemon that you would like play with Lucario. We have Phalanx, we've got Hitmonlee, we've got Hitmontop, you got Rampardos, you got Hitmonchan EX. A lot of these different things, like in the fighting archetype, just really don't feel like that phenomenally strong. I do think Rampardos is strong, but as we know, it's not a lead-off Pokemon. In this deck, you'd literally just be playing Lucario and then like retreating into Rampardos. It's sort of a strange deck list, I'll be honest. But at the end of the day, you know, it is what it is. And I think Lucario is very respectable. It's a very respectable deck, fighting Lucario, that is. Again, the 5th most played deck, it's hanging in there. It's not doing anything like incredible, but it is certainly hanging in there because, again, there are other stronger Lucario archetypes. We're going to put this into the B tier, but I'm going to put it right here. I'm going to put it below Giratina Darkrai. How about that? Should be fine. Next up is Flygon. Flygon has also been a little bit of a surprise to me. It's actually been somewhat decent. If we go all the way down, it's the 31st most played deck. There are some redundant archetypes up here, so not really the 31st most played deck. But it is 57 and 60 so far this season. I don't think that Flygon is like a real meta deck. This win rate is not terrible though, which is pretty funny. It is a small sample size. I think that Flygon is just like a little bit away from being like a real deck. I think they shied away with Flygon. I think they were like, let's not make this actually good. Let's make it like somewhat decent and then sort of not make this set all about Flygon, which is fine by me. I do love spread decks. I think that it's one of the things that's really missing in Pokemon Pocket is like true damage spread archetypes. Flygon is kind of the only thing that we have right now that's somewhat respectable, but I've been covering Pokemon Pocket for a very long time. Flygon's one of those decks that will just not stick around. This is something that just won't really see any play towards the end of the season, and then maybe in a future season, if something new comes out that's really, really good for this deck particularly, it might come back. But for now, it's just not something that is really worth playing. Flygon is going to go right here into the C tier. I need to pull up an example. I keep forgetting to do that. Here is a Flygon deck example. This deck is playing Chingling, which I actually do like. I think Chingling's probably a smart leadoff, just so that we can buy some time until we get into Flygon, and then we keep it alive with Ice Pops and Indeedee. Rocky Helmet for some extra tip damage on the active spot. Not a terrible deck. I love Flygon. I do. I really do like this deck, and I like this Pokemon. It's just that, unfortunately, the only way to really play this is to play like a sustained version of it, and there's just not a really, like, there's not a dragon package. Like, you got to just sort of play things like Indeedee and Ice Pop, and we're only playing one of each, so fundamentally, it's just probably a little bit lackluster in many different ways. I like Flygon. It's cool. Like, it is a really cool concept, but unfortunately, just not that good. So C tier is where it's going to go. Next up is actually one of my personal favorite decks that was added to the game this season, which is Inteleon, and then Mewcwo, which is a really, really fun deck list. So this is all the way down here. Where is it? Can we find it? The 25th most played deck so far this season. Not a great win rate. So it has a 38.5% win rate. This is amongst the lowest in the entire game, but it's a very, very fun deck list. And unfortunately, this deck is going to hard just lose immediately to anything that can heal. like if you see it in Indeedee, the game's over, because this is a deck that's all about dealing like small bits of damage throughout the game. Also, if your opponent is able to KO Mewcwo without actually attacking it through status conditions or whatnot, you also lose the game. And then in the mid game, if you get hit with a Sabrina, you also lose the game. So there's a lot of things that just derail this deck list. I do think Inteleon is actually really, really good. I just think that people aren't really playing it right now to its utmost potential. And I kind of understand why that's the case. Mostly just because you would rather play Greninja and Rare Candies as like a high roll strategy with Cyrus. So that makes sense to me. I do think Inteleon should just be played with Suicune, but then the prize math stuff is a bit awkward. So unfortunately, this is sort of the representation of Inteleon so far this season, and it's really not doing that well. In fact, it is going to be the D tier representation of our tier list this week. So I mean, it is a deck. It's seeing play, and it's really cool. It's really fun. It just has so many different holes in it that we can't really consider it a real meta deck. And then, oh, by the way, we have 6 different decks on the tier list that play Greninja, which, you know, shouldn't really be a surprise to anybody. But yeah, anyway, next up, let's talk about Suicune and Baxcalibur. Suicune Baxcalibur. Now, this is also an interesting aspect of this metagame. Suicune almost pushed out entirely. Not something that, if you told me that before the season, I would have believed you, but yeah, Suicune not really having much of a presence. Suicune Baxcalibur is the 10th most played deck this season. That is 3.17% meta share. It does have a respectable record, 418 to 395. That's almost a 51% win rate if you discount the ties. Not a terrible deck. I don't think this deck's been changed at all. I don't think there's really anything here that jumps out at me. Playing a Guzma instead of Field Blower is incredible to me. I don't understand it, but you know, shout out to this player. And that goes to show that this is the highest performing deck list for Suicune Baxcalibur this season, and they were playing Guzma instead of Field Blower. So you know, that's a little bit interesting. But yeah, I mean, I think Suicune Baxcalibur here. Let's pull up something. Let's pull up this one. This one went 10 and 2. There you go. We got the Field Blower in there now. That makes a little bit more sense. And the Irida. So, and Indeedee as well on the deck list, which is kind of crazy. So, again, I don't think this is a bad deck. Historically, has had good matchups into fire decks, as well as being somewhat good into Hydreigon as well. Suicune really is kind of one of the only like 2 prize archetype decks still in the metagame. Most other decks are either single prize like Hydreigon, or they play Mega Pokemon. Giratina Darkrai would be one example, but as we saw, it doesn't see that much play right now. Zoroark, I guess, might be the other example with Darkrai, and that might be it. Like, there literally might not really be any like true 2 prize archetypes in the game, because the whole strategy with Suicune is to win the game through Suicune and Qianpao, which if you have to go through 2 of those Pokemon, and they're both basic 2 prize EX Pokemon. There's just nothing else in the metagame like that, and it's sort of a remnant of a previous time that was, you know, very popular in Pokemon Pocket. And unfortunately, Suicune really is the last of a dying breed, in a sense. It's not a bad deck list, and it still has a good matchup in Hydreigon, but so does Sceptile, you know what I mean? And like, Sceptile sort of is, in general, in some ways, kind of a better tempo deck. Poncho was released and nobody plays Poncho really, so it's just a weird thing. But I think one of the downsides to Suicune right now is that a lot of these fighting Pokemon now, like in these fighting archetypes, will just KO you. Like Lucario will just straight up one-shot Suicune, even with like Cape and starting planes. So being able to get 1-hit KO'd pretty easily and then not being able to 1-hit KO a lot of Pokemon that sit on the bench like is an inherent downside to Suicune Baxcalibur. It's a respectable deck list, but I think honestly, we'll keep it A tier because I do think this is still a strong deck. I just don't think it'll really be that popular. We're going to put this probably low on the lower spectrum of A tier because there's a lot of decks that I do feel are like A tier potential. Suicune is, I would play it above these other decks in B tier. I just don't think it's, you know, high in the A tier spectrum. You know, it's probably a top 10 deck, which is kind of how I'm feeling. Next up is going to be Decidueye Greninja, which is still seeing play, I think. If we go down, it is, where is it? The 24th most played deck, however, struggling pretty heavily. I think this is more of a remnant of last season. People probably played this early on this season because they kind of carried over, and since then, it's probably not seeing a ton of play, and it's not really seeing a ton of success. One of the upsides to Decidueye that people have figured out is that you can play it with Water and Lightning Energy and play Oricorio in the deck list. And then all of a sudden, you just become, you know, a Greninja Oricorio deck that has the ability to pierce the pain for 100 on the bench, which is strong, but it adds a whole kind of other layer of stuff to a deck list that fundamentally, you know, maybe just doesn't really make that much sense. You know what I mean? Once a deck list really falls into like the Greninja Oricorio stuff, you're really getting away from like the Decidueye aspect of this deck, but it is somewhat fun. Again, like I honestly would expect this type of deck to have a higher win rate, but maybe just sort of, I don't know, like maybe the other Oricorio or Lightning decks are just sort of able to beat this somewhat easily. It's interesting. It's an interesting thing to note. Decidueye should be pretty good into like Absol and Darkrai and Hydreigon and stuff like that. Yeah, it's not doing very well. Let's take a look at these matchups. I know there's not many of them. 2-9 into Hydreigon and 2-6 into Magnezone is pretty tough. Yeah, okay, struggling really in a lot of different aspects here. So, let's not get too crazy with Greninja Decidueye. It is the 24th most played deck, so I don't even know how many people are really playing it right now. We'll put this. I mean, honestly, we'll just put it like C tier. This is something that we just aren't really, you know, we're not going to spend a lot of time discussing this deck list unless it kind of comes back in a big way or changes. So it's just a remnant, I think, of last season. Seeing a little bit of play so far this season, just nothing too impressive about it. C tier is probably fine. Next up, Mega Lucario with Greninja, which people are playing, coincidentally. The 21st most played deck this season, 112 to 106 record. So by far, like the lesser played version of Lucario, people are either playing Fighting Toolbox or, as we see, Sleep Lucario, which is the 3rd most played deck this season. But, you know, Greninja Lucario is going to be quite strong for similar reasons to, you know, Altaria and Greninja. What's interesting here is that we're playing a Goomy instead of like a Chingling or whatnot. Kind of probably makes some sense. The issue with Lucario is that it kind of requires a little bit more going on than Altaria does, right? Because Lucario likes to have 3 energies where Altaria can just sort of operate with 2. You got to play Arena of Antiquity, and you're going to have to buy a little bit of time. You want something in the active spot, but we still have to make room for things like Research, Cyrus, Copycat, Rare Candy, and Pokeball. As we see, this takes up half of the deck. So this really only leaves like 2 cards left in the deck once you're playing the Pokemon and then the trainer lineup. And what are you going to play, right? You probably want to play the Stadium to kind of give Lucario a little bit of like oomph into those attacking options, or else you would just play Altaria. And Chingling doesn't really fit in here too well. So it's interesting. It's kind of a strange lineup here. I do kind of want to take a look at another example. What's this guy running? This is going to be, oh, interesting. Okay, so this is actually with Hitmonchan, which is crazy. So that's going to be the lead off here. Probably not a terrible idea, but you just have to buy some time. You're going to hope that you have to draw into Greninjas, and you know that's always been a difficult part with Altaria and Greninja, but they've kind of solved that problem in another way. So I'm interested that these Lucario decks aren't really doing that, as like the Lucario, the Altaria decks are doing it, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But not a terrible win rate, honestly. I mean, I think this is just a deck that probably won't see much play as the season goes on. I think B tier is probably fine. I'm just going to put it right next to the other Fighting Lucario deck because there is just another way to play Lucario that is substantially better and more popular. And neither of these decks really, I don't think, are like super impressive. So we're just going to put them like in the B tier. B tier is going to be probably pretty full in this tier list. But next up is going to be improved and upgraded and updated Magnezone and Oricorio, Magcorio, whatever you call it. Magnezone EX is a good card. It is. And if we take a look here at the metagame, It is the 4th most played deck this season, with fundamentally the highest average win rate out of anything in the top 8 of most played decks. That's a 864 to 696 record. It does have 62 ties, which in tournaments means that, you know, timers happen in a best of 3 match. So that's why it has 62 ties, and it's an Oricorio deck. But this is a quintessential Magnezone Oricorio season. Let's take a look at Fearless's deck, because he did get 2nd place at PMP2 this past weekend, and this deck's got just a bit of going for it. It's got everything going. You got Oricorio, you got Ogerpon to status heal, you got Giant Cave, Lucky Ice Pop, Lissia to grab Magnemites, Clement to grab Magnetons, Cyrus win condition, we got Copycats, Research, Pokeballs, and of course we've got Mirror Shot Magnezone and then Storm Blade Magnezone EX on the back line. This is just going to be a strong deck, guys. As long as Oricorio is relevant, this is going to be probably still always the best way to play it. I think Magnezone is just inherently broken, and it always has good synergy with Oricorio, because Oricorio slows the game down, and it's a single prize Pokemon, and when you pair it with Magnezone, all of a sudden your opponent has to not only go through Oricorio, which if it's not really built to do that, is inherently going to be difficult, but then they got to go through a Mirror Shot Magnezone, and then potentially a Magnezone EX on the back line, which has 180 HP. This deck is primed and ready to be significant throughout this entire season, and might be the most successful overall, the most successful deck throughout this entire season, which some people might not like the idea of, but I always tell people that Magnezone Oricorio is quintessential to metagame health. When you take a look at this metagame, people are going to say that this is one of the better seasons in terms of meta diversity that we've ever had, and people will not give Magnezone Oricorio the credit that it deserves for being one of the reasons why the metagame is healthy. If Oricorio is not relevant in a metagame, then all of a sudden, like, the decks just become very standardized, and people aren't really accounting for it, and it just sort of bogs the metagame down a little bit. So again, I think that Hydreigon not being too crazy this season makes Magnezone Oricorio a little bit better, and that makes the metagame better. So shout out to Magnezone Oricorio. S tier, that's right. Always, let's go. I mean, come on. I mean, we can't sit here and say that Magnezone Oricorio, after the inclusion of Magnezone EX, and of course, you know, the meta shift of Sceptile coming in and kind of knocking Hydreigon down a peg, this is going to be such a good deck this season, if not the best deck. S tier, it's got to go S tier. So shout out to Magnezone Oricorio. Next up is going to be Sleep Lucario. That's right. People are playing Bad Dreams, and they're playing it with Lucario. The 3rd most played deck this season, but I will tell you that this is going to overpass Blaziken. Some of the decks that are going to rise up and play more so this season, I think some of the Altaria decks will likely rise up, but Sleep Lucario could end up a top 1, top 2 most played deck so far this season. Magnezone might rise up, but, you know, Oricorio decks never see a ton of play. Sceptile likely going to go up a little bit as well. So I would imagine that Mega Lucario and Igglybuff will end up being potentially the most played deck this season. But take a look at these matchups, though. So when it comes to, and I know it didn't win PMPT this past weekend, but throughout the entire week leading up to this past weekend, it was by far the most successful deck. Got first place 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times in 100 plus player, 4 times in 200 plus player tournaments. So this was by far like the top deck going into this weekend. 52.16% win rate. That's 929 wins and 804 losses. So again, I know that the results this weekend didn't really show like super dominance for Sleep Lucario, but trust me, it is a top tier deck this metagame. Incredibly dangerous for the same reasons that Altaria, Sleep Altaria was dangerous last season, but now instead of being hit for 130, now we're just kind of coming in and getting hit for 190, which doesn't feel very fair. It's not fair. Lucario is incredibly strong. It's very strong. Not many things in the game really want to go up against this, and that's the inherent truth. Sceptile might be a decent answer with Ogerpon to protect from Bad Dreams. 210 HP Sceptile to live a hit for Mega Lucario. There's certain things in the game that can contend with this, but trust me, this is one of the more like powerful, just strong options that we have available to us right now. This to me, clear and far away also S tier. These aren't necessarily in order, but I think I would probably put this above Magnezone, quite frankly. Sleep Lucario going into the S tier. The fighting archetype has hopped from, and I know it took a little bit of time to figure out what Lucario deck to play, but honestly, fighting went from being literally not seeing any play to being potentially the #1 deck of the metagame. So that's how crazy Pokemon Pocket. That's Pokemon Pocket. Sometimes Sometimes it happens like that, you know what I mean? Anyway, shout out to Mega Lucario going up into the S tier. Next up is Sceptile, and I know this might be a hot take, but I've just condensed them all into one archetype. I know that if you go in the Limitless tab, there's like 6 different ways people are playing Sceptile. And unfortunately, you know, depending on which Pokemon you play with Sceptile, it's going to change how it's categorized on Limitless. But I would say that these deck lists are all kind of going to be pretty... they're going to be unified. They're going to be standardized as the season goes on. Right now, the most played Sceptile archetype is in 6th place. This is Sceptile and Pheromosa. But in 14th place, there's Sceptile and Ogerpon. In 16th place, there's just Sceptile. And then in 23rd place, there's Sceptile and Sceptile EX. So it's like, it's a weird thing. And they all have like pretty decent like win rates if you look at all of them. But like I said, I think by the end of the season, everybody will just be playing sort of the one standard Sceptile list. So whatever that list ends up being, maybe it's already exists right now. But we just get done one single archetype for Sceptile because again, they're all somewhat similar. I expect them to honestly... let's pull up like the example here, because like who won the tournament? I just want to see, where can we find it? Was it this one? Yeah, so this one right here. So here's like an example. This is the first place deck from this past weekend. This is a very solid example of like what a Sceptile deck will probably look like moving forward. I think it'll probably Rocky Helmets. Fragrant Forest is an incredible benefit to any grass type deck, but specifically Sceptile, because it allows you to get around Shingling item lock and just be a better Pokeball, which is a really big deal. This deck list played 1 Kartana, 1 Pheromosa, 1 Shingling. I might end up, or what we might end up seeing is maybe the replacement of Shingling for like an Ogerpon for the sleep matchup. There is a lot of merit to playing Ogerpon in Sceptile, so maybe it ends up being a little bit more common. Depending on whether sleep is super prevalent in the metagame, you can just take it in or out of your deck list. But again, 90% of the deck is just going to be Sceptile with your like Pheromosa / Kartana leadoff. And I think that's enough for Sceptile to be a really, really strong contender in the metagame. Let's just pull up like another example here. Like if we go to Sceptile Pheromosa, well, we can pull up this list here. This is going to be no Grovyle here. This is actually double Leaf Cape with 2 Pheromosa and then 1 Kartana. So you can kind of see like how things are operating. I don't know if I really like Leaf Cape, but if you do play Leaf Cape, you're going to want to play with like a Lily or an Erica to get outside of 2 KO breakpoints. But for the most part, I think Rocky Helmet's just better to guarantee you're going to get KOs on Pokemon where you can, you know, most certainly take KOs on. That's sort of how I'm feeling. And then Ogerpon, which doesn't have a great win rate, but again, into sleep matchups, it's going to be really, really nice. So again, that's kind of how I'm feeling about Sceptile. No matter which of these decks that you're going to really categorize or play, as long as you're playing whatever ends up being the best option given that week, and we'll keep you updated on which of those decks it really is. I think Sceptile is a really, really good deck list. But if we go back, let's take a look at the win rates, right? So this Sceptile deck is a 51.34% win rate, and let's take a look at this because it's got the biggest matchup spread. It's got the largest sample size. 542 to 496, so a good win rate. 51.5% win rate is very, very respectable. But let's take a look at these matchups here, right? 60% almost into Hydreigon, very, very good. And then look at this, 21 to 69. So the majority of its losses, in fact, are to this one Blaziken matchup, which is specifically here just to kind of to beat Sceptile. So it's really not something to consider too heavily. Good into Sleep Lucario, which is a big deal. Good into Fighting Lucario, good into Zoroark. Bad into Sleep Altaria, though, which is interesting. And then pretty solid into basically everything else. So what's interesting about Sceptile is that I think that in general, like if we're just talking about Sceptile as a core package, I do think it's got S tier potential. However, will it remain that way throughout the next week or so? It's hard to say because it is in the spotlight. It did win this weekend. Probably going to get counterplayed pretty heavily. So it's a tough thing to sort of say here because Sceptile could fall off. It could just absolutely just nosedive for the next week. We really don't know how the meta will change and adapt to Sceptile. So I'm going to be conservative here. I'm going to be conservative. I know it won this past weekend, but I'm going to be conservative. I'm going to put Sceptile at the top of A tier. I think it's just a very, very good deck list that I'm a little bit scared will just be re-counterplayed out into oblivion. So we're going to put it into the A tier. That's just where I'm feeling here. But maybe it is truly an S tier deck. It just, I don't know. I know it got first place, but I'm still a little bit iffy about it. Anyway, a bit of a tangent. Next up, let's talk about, what is it? Steelix. So let's talk about Mega Steelix. Still seeing a bit of play. The 26th most played deck this season. A massive drop off from where it was last season. 56 and 68. That's a 45% win rate. Not doing very well currently, unfortunately. It's just not, it's not really the season for Sceptile. Probably maybe because Altaria is less common and things like Lucario are just going to hit through your damage reduction. You know, it doesn't really matter when Lucario is going to hit you for 190 twice. You're just not you're not going to be able to live, no matter how much Indeedee stuff you got going on. This is actually a Pichu Oricorio deck. Is this really the highest placing version? Dash MD. I guess maybe it is. So kind of a niche Oricorio version of Steelix ends up being the most played version. But let's take a look at this one went 8 and 3. Is this more standard? Okay, this is more standard Mega Steelix deck. And again, I think that Steelix is very dependent on certain breakpoints. Unfortunately, the Steel type decks just don't have a great identity in the metagame besides damage reduction. And when Mega Lucario comes into the metagame and starts hitting you for 190 every turn, it's just not something that you're gonna, you know, you're just not going to enjoy that season. And I think that's where Steelix is at. I think sustained decks are struggling with Lucario coming in and just being against it. They're like, you know, Lucario doesn't care about anything. It's just going to come in, do a bunch of damage, and you're just not going to be able to deal with it. So yeah, shout out to Steelix, a respectable deck list, a very cool deck. I know we got Scizor last season, I think it was. Scizor just kind of ended up being somewhat irrelevant, but maybe it has more potential. I just think we need something better. I think we need like a more better steel type mega archetype. And I don't know what there is out there. Maybe Mega Aggron. Who knows? Comment down below what you would like to see from a steel archetype. My issue is that I'm afraid anything that comes into the metagame for a steel type mega will just be all about defense and damage reduction. And I don't know if that'll ever be like a top tier deck strategy. So Steelix, let's put it right here into the C tier. I think it's just one of those C tier decks, you know? That's how I feel. Next up, Manectric, Turbo Manectric. Are people still playing this? This was literally the top deck last season, all the way down to the 18th most played deck. But take a look at this, 180 to 128, a 57% win rate. So coincidentally, the highest out of any of the decks in the video today. Mega Manectric, I guess, absolutely slept on is how I feel about this. The matchups, though, I'm interested in. So 11 and 4 to Blaziken, so we beat Blaziken. 6 and 9 into Magnezone, so we don't win that matchup. We're not winning Hydreigon. A 50-50 into Sceptile. Really good into Ninetales. Good into Zoroark. And then pretty 50-50 into Lucario, which is crazy. And then, yeah, so we kind of do really well into Suicune as well. So these matchup spreads like are a little bit, you know, because the sample size is so much smaller, we don't really have like a great example, but seemingly holding its own into even the matchups you would suspect it to be quite poor into. I guess maybe just feasting on these Blazikens and Ninetales and whatnot. But I think that Manectric is honestly still a top tier strategy. So I think it's very slept on. Let's take a look at this. This deck went 10 and 3. I don't think it's really changed. I think it's just Turbo Manectric, right? We got Zero Aura, we got Electric Generator, Training Arena, Rocky Helmet, fast pacing, right? In your face, early damage, consistent. And those are things that historically have been always successful in Pokemon Pocket. If you're consistent and very fast paced, you're going to be at a pretty heavy advantage. The distinct difference with Manectric is that it actually gets stronger throughout the game. So unlike other aggro decks that maybe come out and can hit you for 80 on turn 1 like Zoroark, which hits for 90, the damage actually goes up. It goes up and it goes up the more KOs you get. So all of a sudden, by the end of the game, Manectric's actually hitting you for, what is it, 140 damage or something? It's crazy. It's a lot. Like, Manectric's just a really good Pokemon. And Lightning, I think it just fits well with the Lightning archetype. Also, the promo Electrike massively slept on. This thing just KOs baby Pokemon outright, which is really strong. So really slept on, guys. I know it sounds strange in this new fighting type metagame, but Mega Manectric, very respectable. Because it hasn't seen enough play, I'm not going to like mark it down as like a top tier deck, but it is going to be right there with Sceptile. I'm going to put this thing immediately top of 8. I'm going to put it below Sceptile, but it's right there. It's high A tier. It's a very, very good deck right now. I think it's only a matter of time before it comes back and really starts showing people that, listen, like, you got to be prepared for this Turbo Lightning deck. I always love Manectric because I think a lot of people associate the Lightning type archetype in Pokemon Pocket with like Oricorio and sort of the toxicity that it is, you know, that effect. But to me, the real Lightning decks are things like Manectric, right? Just really fast-paced, you know, free retreat cost, low HP, low energy damage, just really in your face, really aggressive and fast-pacing, and that's what Lightning-type decks are to me, and I think Manectric is like a really good embodiment of that. So I hope it sees more play because it is still seemingly one of the better decks in the game. Could easily be S tier. but it's going to have to see a little bit more play. It's going to have to win a couple more tournaments, right? The thing about Mega Lucario is that it's won 5 tournaments this week, so that's why it's S tier, you know? But yeah, very high average win rate, so there you go. Next up is going to be Zoroark. We didn't say Zoroark this time. It is Zoroark. And Zoroark... It's so hard to say it. Also, a pretty respectable deck list. Let's go and check it out. It is the 7th most played deck of this season, and it has a 510 to 455 matchup. I really like Zoroark. I just like the deck list. I think it's got a lot going for it. And one of my favorite new Pokemon in the game, kind of slept on, although it is the 7th most played deck, 52% win rate basically. Let's take a look at an example here. Hasn't gotten first place at a lot of tournaments, but I think it's suffering from being similar to Hydreigon and more people just choosing to play Hydreigon. In fact, this past weekend at PMPT number 29, virtually nobody played Zoroark. They all just played Hydreigon, and we saw how that happened. Like, it is a deck that's still going to not do well in a Sceptile, so it's going to struggle in the same ways that Hydreigon struggles. In general, though, I think it's actually better in some ways, and it's a much more enjoyable deck for me because, you know, getting the very consistent, like, every turn, it's turn 290 with this deck list, which feels really strong, but it feels better than like half the time turn 2 130 like Hydreigon does. It just feels a little bit more fair. It's like ethical. This is like ethical Hydreigon, which I love again, and I'm glad that it's in the game. I just now wish that Hydreigon was out of the game. You know what I mean? But I think it'll continue to be a good deck. I think that Darkrai, Absol, the whole Dark package is quite strong, and then the Bombardiers is a really big improvement to several of the Dark archetypes. And as we see Hydreigon also playing Bombardier. So shout out to the Dark archetype and shout out to Zeraora. I said Zeraora. It's Zoroark. Shout out to Zoroark for being honestly like a Dark type deck that I actually like because it's been quite some time here. But yeah, no real first place finishes, but really high up in a lot of different tournaments. So a respectable deck list, one that I do feel deserves an A tier mention. We're going to put it bottom A tier. We're going to just put it down there in the bottom because it is a good deck. It's a very, very good deck. I'm going to put it above Suicune. I'm going to do it. More people should play Zoroark. I understand why they don't because Hydreigon does exist, but yeah, I think it deserves definitely a lot of mention. Next up is going to be Altaria and Gourgiest. This is going to be one of the more interesting examples here. So Altaria Gourgiest is the 9th most played deck this season with an incredible win rate of 54%. That's 513 to 406. This is like sneakily, excuse me, like potentially one of the better decks in the entire game. And let's take a look here. Several first place finishes in some smaller tournaments, very consistent placements all across the board. I do want to take a look at its matchup spread. Winning matchup spread into Sleep Lucario, struggling a bit into Hydreigon, just absolutely auto winning almost into Blaziken. It's still holding its own into Magnezone because Gourgeist can beat Oricorio. Really, really good into Lucario because again, the Psychic type hitting for weakness. But you know, not great into Altaria Greninja, but that's a small sample size. Holding its own into Sceptile, losing hard though into Zoroark. So that's sort of an interesting thing to note here. Also losing hard into Giratina Darkrai, also kind of an interesting thing to note. But against a lot of these top tier meta relevant archetypes, I do think that this win rate is likely inflated by Blaziken. So if we consider Blaziken as a deck that will continue to see play for the next couple of weeks, then, you know, this is something to really keep our eye on. But again, I think Blaziken's going to fall off pretty heavy. So the main points to mention about this Altaria deck is that it seemingly counters the fighting archetypes while also being able to hold its own strongly into Oricorio, which coincidentally is a very, very big deal. None of these win rates are super glaring other than Zoroark. So this could be an interesting mid-season meta progression. Let's pull up the deck list that I don't think many people might expect. Like in a week from now, Gourgeist Altaria might be a top 5, top 3 most played deck list, which would really open things up for Zoroark to have a significant counter meta presence against this deck list specifically. But, you know, Lucario is going to continue to see play, and Magnezone will continue to see play. As we just mentioned, those are 2 deck lists that we have into our S tier. So if this is a deck list that can beat both of the S tier deck lists while also holding its own into other archetypes, honestly, we got to rank this deck accordingly. Gourgeist is going S tier. it is gonna go S tier. This might be the best way to play Altaria right now, which is a crazy shift. You know, when you take a look, it is fighting Psychic with Magnezone here, so there's an interesting little triangle going on. The thing about this Altaria Gourgeist deck is that it seemingly does lose to several decks in the A tier, but has good matchups into other S tier deck lists. Very consistent. Gourgeist Altaria has always been consistent, and it's been one of probably the better tempo decks of all time, or at least since B series started. So this is kind of a sleeper pick. People are kind of just, I think, sleeping on Altaria in general right now because Sleep Altaria kind of got overtook by Lucario, but I think Altaria is a good enough Pokemon. It's got a good enough sort of community of other Pokemon around it it'll continue to be relevant throughout the season. So Altaria Gourgeist, the 9th most played deck so far right now, but potentially one of the highest, if not the highest, other than Manectric, which is very surprising to me. I'm quite surprised here. It's going S tier. It's going S tier, guys. Shout out to Altaria. Yeah, I'm feeling good. Feeling good about the tier list. Comment down below. What do you guys think? We're almost at 44 minutes. We got to hustle here to end this video because I also got to record a Pokemon Champions meta report. Next up is Hydreigon. Everybody's favorite, everyone's favorite deck. Hydreigon, the most played deck so far this season. You can't escape it. It is the default deck currently in Pokemon Pocket. Just under 10% meta share though, so it's not over 10%. So it's, it's in control. A very respectable win rate though this season. 1,335 wins to 1,184 losses. That is a 51.5% win rate. So very respectable. It has multiple first place finishes so far this season. As we saw, it did make top 4 and it was, the most played deck at PMPT this past weekend. Let's take a look at its matchup spreads, though, because this is something that I find to be a bit interesting. Again, just a deck that beats Blaziken. I really don't think Blaziken will continue to see much play. So that's why I'm not really accounting for this to be, like all of these decks that do really well into Blaziken, I just don't feel that strongly that that's going to matter much in a week or two. So Hydreigon, losing, but very slightly, but doesn't have a great matchup in his Sleep Lucario. A pretty decent matchup into Magnezone, as always. Actually beating Dark Greninja, which is a bit scary. Fighting Lucario. But look at this, losing to Zoroark. It loses to Zoroark, like, pretty handedly, 42-70. So that's not a good matchup. Also losing to Sceptile decks, which is crazy. Also losing to Suicune Baxcalibur. Also losing to Altaria Greninja. Also losing to other Sceptile decks. So, like, when you take a look at Hydreigon, and not only how it's positioned against some of the decks that used to see more play, but how it's positioned against the decks that we expect to see more play as time goes on, it's not terrible, but it's not really as good as you might think. We're losing to Sleep, we're losing to Zoroark, and we're losing to Sceptile. These are things that are going to see more play as the season goes on. And that's a very, very interesting thing to note. There is going to be an example here. This is kind of a revised, if you haven't been watching this past few days, kind of a revised version of Hydreigon. This is just sort of what the new season of Hydreigon looks like. Incorporating Bombardier, meaning no Nihilego, meaning we're playing Rocky Helmet instead of Poison Bar. But, I mean, at the end of the day, it does feel to me like Hydreigon is holding on by kind of a thread this season, really dependent in a lot of ways of just getting lucky with Ice Pops. And that's kind of all this deck feels like to me is, are we flipping heads with Ice Pop? Which, I don't have a lot of respect for, quite frankly. But Hydreigon, as we know, still a strong deck list. It is Hyrule, so it can win. Now, how do I feel about Hydreigon in terms of where it should be ranked on the tier list? That's another question. I still think it's respectable, but not S tier. That's right. I do not think Hydreigon is S tier potential. I do think it is A tier potential. Now, where do we put it A tier? Is a good question. I do think it's got to go right there with Sceptile, but Manectric kind of threw a wrench in things as well. I'm going to put it, it's really tough. I'm going to put Hydreigon right here because I do think it's high A tier. Now, Sceptile, Manectric, and Hydreigon are all 3 decks that I would put very close to each other. And then the other 3 decks in A tier are decks that, again, are also good. So it's interesting. Anything A tier and above is very, very solid right now. Clear distinction between B tier and A tier in my mind. But yeah, Hydreigon still deserves A tier, but I think Zoroark has a lot of upside. We might be seeing a shift. Maybe not, but we'll see. I would love it if Zoroark took over for Hydreigon, but we'll see. Next up, gonna be Greninja and Altaria. Greninja Altaria. This is the, where is it? We got to go back another one. It is the 11th most played deck this season, 416 to 375, a 51.5% win rate. I mean, it's still, come on, this is still a good deck list. What scares me though, it did get first place at a big tournament a couple days ago. What scares me about this deck list, coincidentally, is going to be this new Lucky Egg package. And I'm a little bit terrified in that. I'm really scared that this whole thing will be a little bit too good, right? Because you get the item lock down, and then your punishment for being able to deal with this Chingling item lock is giving your opponent potentially like 10 extra cards throughout the first couple of turns of the game, which doesn't feel fair. You know what I mean? Like, you either get hit with item lock or your opponent draws a bunch of their whole deck. Like, how does that sounds crazy to me. You know, it's like a lose-lose situation, but that's what Lucky Egg really feels like in this deck list. And trust me, I'm telling you, the last thing you want is for Altaria and Greninja to consistently reach the board state that they want to reach on turn 3. That's not what you want. One of the biggest ways that you beat Altaria Greninja was that they just didn't draw cards. You know what I mean? And now, you know, now it doesn't matter because they're gonna draw cards. You can't progress in the game without KOing Chinglings, and then they're going to draw cards. So theoretically, they could just kind of whiff on the Lucky Eggs, but I'm sorry, this deck terrifies me to absolutely no end. I know we just kind of gave a big spiel there about Altaria Gourgeist, which has been very respectable, but I do think this is a deck that could sneak up and absolutely dominate throughout the season just based around the Lucky Egg Chingling shenanigans. Something I'm a little bit afraid of. I'm quite afraid of this deck list. Yet again, another deck that has to go high A tier in my mind, but seemingly could be S tier very, very quickly. But where do I want to put it? Do I want to put it, you know, below Hydreigon? Do I want to put it, you know, I'm going to put it right here. I'm going to put it between like Manectric. So, I mean, to be fair, Sceptile, Manectric, Altaria, Greninja, Hydreigon, these are all decks that to me, I think are right. They're all right neck and neck. So the ordering doesn't matter a lot here, but high A tier, the top half of A tier, certainly very, very, very good. And that's how I feel about it. Anyway, next up, Suicune Greninja. Man, this is a long video. I said it wouldn't be long. Suicune Greninja is all the way down at the 27th most played deck, 54 and 68. That's a 43% win rate. So again, Suicune just not doing very well this season. It's just not. Like, that's the reality of Suicune right now, is that it just doesn't feel as good as it was. And I think it's just because it gets one-hit KO'd by too many Pokemon in this current metagame. But you know, it's still a decent deck list. I think Qianpao is still the best way to play Suicune, at least right now. I'm going to give Suicune some respect, and I'm going to say that this is also B tier, but I'm actually going to put it, like, I'm going to just put it right here at the bottom of B tier. Maybe it's like deserves like probably middle. Why did we put Blaziken so high? I don't even know. I'm probably going to put Blaziken right here at the bottom. I'm going to put it below Suicune. And is it better than Ninetales though? That's what's crazy. Probably not, honestly. We'll do it right here. We'll just put it like right here, lower middle B tier-ish. Yeah, we'll just put it next to Ninetales. Because I think in terms of like its overall viability, it's somewhat similar to all of these deck lists, but there's Suicune Baxcalibur, which is just sort of a better version of Suicune. So that's why we're not going to rank it that highly. Next up, Meowscarada. Let's see. Meowscarada is seeing some play. The 22nd most played deck and a very respectable, pretty much winning record, 85 to 79. It does have 7 ties in there, so this says 49% win rate, but kind of a winning matchup in some ways. I did go 10-0, or 10-1 rather, and won this Fraps tournament, which is kind of crazy. This is definitely not a bad deck list. I'm curious about its win rates, but theoretically speaking, you know, we have Ogerpon, we have Fragrant Forest, we got Leaf Capes. Sorry, I hit my mic again. You know, Erica's Lucky Ice Pops. Like, Meowscarada is going to be probably your best option when it comes to 2 prize, you know, archetypes for the grass archetype. And we need to sit back and take a look at anything that's grass type has been pretty dramatically increased in viability with the inclusion of Fragrant Forest. Grass has some of the best support in the entire game. We've got Erica healing, we got Leaf Cape, we got Fragrant Forest, we have Ogerpon to protect from status conditions. You know, the grass decks just have a little bit more going for them than, you know, some of the, like most other archetypes in the game, quite frankly. And although Sceptile definitely is going to kind of take the limelight away from Meowscarada, I do think it's a really strong, you know, secondary option as a 2-prize Pokemon, whereas Sceptile is, of course, a 3-prize option. And we are playing the non-EX Meowscarada as a single-prize archetype Pokemon as well. The prize math in this deck is inherently strange, so I don't really know why. Like, I get why we play Meowscarada, because it does more damage to EX Pokemon, but it is a little bit awkward from a prize math perspective. Let's take a look at these matchup spreads, though, because I'm kind of curious. 8-8 into Hydreigon, so not an incredible record there. Not a great record in Dark Greninja. Loses to Sleep Lucario, but beats Fighting Lucario. It's crazy that it's gone 3-7 into Sleep Lucario, but this is a small sample size. So very kind of sporadic in terms of its win rates throughout the board. It's 3-0 into Inteleon. RIP Inteleon. We're just going to put Meowscarada, I think, just very comfortably like B tier. Pretty, like, we'll put it like middle B tier. I definitely don't think it's terrible, but I don't think it's necessarily something I would put like too much thought into. You know what I mean? It's probably pretty somewhat similar to a lot of these decks in the game in terms of its viability, Probably never going to see that much play. Maybe more of a flash in the pan for the early season before Sceptile really kind of dominates in terms of the grass decks. All right, next up, we've got two different Charizard decks, and then we have Dark Greninja. The first Charizard deck is going to be Charizard Y, because some people do just play Charizard Y, and there's some inherent value to it. So mixed Charizard, meaning X and Y, is the 15th most played deck here with, close to a 50% win rate, 225 to 234, so a little bit below 50%. But if we go down here, the 28th most played deck is just Entei and Charizard Y. And I think in a metagame right now, with so many mega Pokemon seeing play with Sceptile and Lucario, I think Charizard Y is just a much better Pokemon to play. It is the only thing in the game that is going to one-hit KO any mega Pokemon pretty easily. A couple of really high, decent finishes here. It also has a 52, almost a 53% win rate, 78 to 63. So very respectable here. I think Charizard is kind of slept on. I do think it's a much better option currently in the metagame than Blaziken, because at least it does something. Like, I understand Charizard has its issues, but at the end of the day, like, just being able to one-hit KO anything in the game into a lot of these decks means that you're just going to win. You know what I mean? So you'd rather just have a purpose of your deck, and Charizard Y at least has a significant purpose. Charizard and X and Blaziken feel like, they're okay. You can 2-hit KO Pokemon, but at the same vein, like, wouldn't we rather just 1-hit KO in most matchups if we are going up against other mega Pokemon? And I think that Blaziken and Charizard X both struggle into Hydreigon. So for most of those matchups, you're just going to lose anyway. Just play Mega Charizard Y and beat those mega decks pretty consistently. I really like Mega Charizard Y. I think that it's actually a pretty respectable deck currently in the metagame. And this here, has A-tier potential. Maybe bottom 8. Honestly, so many decks in the A tier. Is this a cop-out tier list? It might be. But I think that this is like pretty low here on this A tier spectrum. I'm going to put it right here, kind of in that second half, that bottom half of A tier. For those confused, left is higher to me. I know some people just read tier lists differently. Like, theoretically speaking, if you're at the beginning of this A tier, this is the end of A tier. So this would be lower and this would be higher. Some people get that mixed, but that's just sort of how I do it, I guess. Maybe that's wrong. I don't even know. It's going to be an hour-long video. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Next up, let's do Dark Greninja. Dark Greninja is an interesting deck when I took a look at the data this season, because it is the 8th most played deck, has had some really high matchup spreads here. This win rate seems like that it's below 50%, but that's because it has 26 ties and it's operating at 479 to 457. So it's actually got a winning matchup spread theoretically. But I think this is definitely about a 50-50 deck. Did get first place at a couple of tournaments here, which is pretty cool. It's been a very respectable deck this season. I think it's just a good deck list. I do. And what's cool about this deck list is that it does really well into some specific matchups. And it's just a kind of a unique deck. It's definitely a more unique control type deck. I don't know why we haven't seen Lucky Egg in this Chingling archetype, but we see it in Sleep because they're both playing Chingling and Greninja. So maybe we just kind of change this deck. Instead of Inflatable Boat, Rocky Helmet, maybe we just play Lucky Egg. Maybe. Who knows? I don't know. What are we doing with what are we doing with Greninja? I don't really know. Let's take a look at these matchup spreads though, because I am curious. Losing to Hydreigon, unfortunately. Also losing into Magnezone, also losing kind of into Sleep Lucario. Beating Zoroark, though. Beating Fighting Lucario, losing to Sceptile, beating Suicune. So, I mean, it's kind of like pretty 50-50. Like, this isn't a volatile matchup spread. Like, these are some matchups that are quite good, some that are quite bad. Unfortunately, though, like, just losing to Hydreigon, even with the Chinglings, means that this deck probably struggles in a lot of different ways here. Really high matchup spreads, though, into some of these less popular decks. I don't know how I really feel about Dark Greninja. Are we actually going to put another deck into the A tier though? I don't know if it's really A tier. Like, to me, Dark Greninja, but it is popular. So that's the other thing, is like, would I rather play Dark Greninja than any of these other decks that I put into the A tier? That's kind of the question, isn't it? I want to just throw Zoroark into the S tier and just meta manipulate everybody and say this is broken. But I know we didn't do that, but we probably should have. Listen, are we going to let's just put it top of B tier. People are probably not, I don't even think it's better than B tier though. This is another lower A tier deck. There's just so many of those decks in the metagame, which is fine. I think that's fine. We're going to put it right here. Lots of A tier decks, but again, I do think it's sort of in the bottom, the more lower spectrum of A tier, kind of bubbling in that top 10 deck range, and that's the reality of it. But the thing is here, the reason why these are A tier and not B tier is because there's like a clear distinction between A tier and B tier decks. And I think all of these decks that I put into the A tier are like true meta contending deck lists. So we just happen to have a lot of them this season. That's kind of how I think what really this comes down to. So yeah, I mean, I think these are like the top decks in the game right now, but like everything in A tier like could just win. It could just win something. And you're like, yeah, that's a really good deck. Anyway, kind of a cop-out. Another deck into the A tier, I suppose. Lastly is going to be Mixed Charizard. So Charizard X and Charizard Y. It does have a just a little bit below 50-50 win rate. Not a terrible deck. But yet again, I think it suffers from the same thing that's like we don't beat Oricorio. So that's an inherent thing about this deck. You just lose to Oricorio. And, half of the time, we have Charizard Y for the Mega decks, and then, theoretically you have Mega Charizard X for the non-Mega decks, but it's really not that good into some of these non-Mega archetypes. You are weak to water, you struggle a bit into Suicune and Shanpao, and then at the end of the day, you're going to lose to Hydreigon. So Charizard Y really kind of carrying this deck, and I think as we saw from the other Charizard Y deck, it's better to just play the non-EX Charizard so you have a chance to just, or non-Mega Charizard, so you have a chance to beat Oricorio. Charizard X just doesn't feel like it provides that much value in this current metagame where everyone else is just playing Mega Pokemon, so you might as well just KO the Mega Pokemon and win. You know what I mean? Charizard X was designed to beat non-Mega EX cards. Like, that was the whole concept for Mega Charizard Y, is that you can KO certain Pokemon, but also live a hit and then definitely KO anything after that. You know what I mean? So it's like, it's really, really good into like, just the EX cards that aren't Megas, but there's really not many of those in the metagame, which is why I think Mega Charizard Y is just much more valuable. So I'm going to be putting this probably B tier. Let's just put this like just right in the mid, like we'll put it right here. Well, no, it's probably, honestly, I don't know. I'll put it right here. It's just middle B tier. It's just a very meh deck is kind of how I feel about it. There you go, guys. That is the tier list. What are your thoughts? What are your hopes? What are your dreams? And what are your opinions? I think this metagame is really fun. This is an hour-long video, RIP. I honestly think this metagame is one of my favorites of all time. Give a big shout out to the developers for giving us, three really distinct new archetypes in Lucario, Sceptile, and Zoroark, which are all really high quality and actually have really decent placements in the metagame right now that I really like. So again, I want to give a big shout out to everybody who watched this video and has been a part of the Pokemon Pocket community for the last few months. And we had some ups, we had some downs there. Right now, it's a really fun time to play the game. So I want to give a big shout out to everybody. And again, thank you guys for watching. Comment down below. What do you think of the tier list? Sorry, this was an hour-long video, but I had a lot of thoughts because this is a very interesting season. And yeah, let's wrap this up here. All right, guys. Peace out. Have a good one. We'll see you guys later. And yeah. Bye.